essentially plants that effect in the past and causes that effect to become the catalyst for the cause of the effect that you brought back in time. So just to spin this analogy one more time, if after identifying future US presidents, the CIA has been approaching them and apprising them of their destinies as president, and training them, and even putting the teams in place to get them elected after they have trained them, and even manipulating the electoral process like they did in 2000 when they made George W. Bush president, even though he hadn't won the election. By taking data from the future like that and using it in the present to create the future, you are creating the very effects that you've monitored or detected from the future in a way that works with them in the present to create the very future that you've sensed. And there's a syllogistic or solipsistic dimension to that. That is one of the reasons why, for example, my father was always instructing Connie not to share with me any of the things he had told her about me. Because you don't want to alter the present by giving somebody prior knowledge of a future event or contingency unless you're damn sure they need to know it. And that the benefits outweigh the risks of that. But I think that if we look at the history of the last 40 years of U.S. presidential politics, if we consider the fact that I met George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush at the La Hacienda restaurant in Albuquerque when I was on Pegasus and they were being run through to be told what their destinies were, and that George W. Bush, his 25-year-old son, was all over those tables at that restaurant where the project people were dining, joking repeatedly, my daddy and I are going to be president, as he was, in his silly way. If we then factor in the fact that I heard Bill Clinton spoken of as a future U.S. president, and we also factor in my entirely happenstance-based encounter with Barack Obama in the spring-summer time frame of 1982, in which not only he, but some of his allies in the anti-apartheid movement had been new to a personal certainty, a factual certainty that he was destined to be president, we have to conclude that the very presidency of the United States may have already been altered by quantum interpolation of future data. And that's a significant reality that we need to confront. It's a dreadful thing to contemplate, but all of the information I have from serving on Pegasus and then later having my chance encounter with President Obama when we were only 20 years old indicates that that is in fact what has happened. There is an inner party, an inner directorate within the U.S. government that is relying on quantum access to influence events. And I'm hoping and praying that my work in the disclosure movement will end that conspiracy.
Are you there?
Yeah?
Oh, okay.
So
wonderful. Well said.
That's the political dimension. We know that quantum access, that what Project Pegasus achieved in teleportation-based time travel and in chronovision with the Arnetti and Gemelli devices, that became part of the intelligence function. In other words, a major dimension to my experiences is that, in the intelligence community, people speak of sources and methods. What the people, the world, and certainly the United States and the rest of the world were never told, when they were spinning the Philadelphia experiment cover story, which was a cover story scripted by the Office of Naval Intelligence, to de-link via disinformation the critical linkage between Tesla, teleportation, and the Los Alamos physicists. They didn't reveal to the people the very intelligent sources and methods that were then emerging, which wasn't just about torturing somebody at Gitmo or parking a helicopter over somebody's house with thermographic imaging in it, but in fact involved using quantum access to achieve remote sensing of past and future events. That's what Pegasus achieved. That's why after Pegasus concluded, or at least that phase of development under Pegasus concluded in 1972, Ralph M. Parsons made such a profit that year that Ralph M. Parsons bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht, the most expensive and largest private yacht in the world at that time. and named it Pegasus 2 for Project Pegasus, even though Ralph M. Parsons had never owned anything called Pegasus 1. And the ship itself had not been Pegasus 1 under the flag of Adnan Khashoggi. So there is a deep political implication to my story, and that is that at least one faction in the permanent secret government of the United States, what we might describe as that power elite that includes people like Donald Rumsfeld, people who have worked in elective office and the intelligence community and secret military projects, been in the military, and then worked at cabinet level and also for very powerful private corporations. People like Don Rumsfeld have been in a world for the last 40 years in which they have been reading intelligence reports about the future gathered by the quantum access technologies that Project Pegasus developed. I find that so serious in its implications, in its deep political implications, that I've been willing to step forward and possibly be assassinated, that is, lose my life as a result of bringing this information to the attention of the world. But it needs to be brought to the attention of the world because major events are being planned on the basis of the expectation of future events. For example, the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I'm confident that on at least one timeline, the U.S. intelligence community had concluded that Saddam Hussein acquired weapons of mass destruction and used them in some way, maybe to bomb London or Paris or New York City or God knows where, maybe Miami, maybe Rome, and to end the Vatican. And I believe we invaded Iraq in 2003 to prevent him from getting those weapons of mass destruction, which was certainly a worthwhile initiative. But in the confusion after that, we saw the Secretary of State of the United States, Colin Powell, embarrassed by having made false claims before the United Nations that the U.S. government had determined, in fact, that Saddam Hussein of Iraq was in possession of weapons of mass destruction, not that he might get them. And I think that confusion resulted from the fact that they had used quantum access to determine that at least one or several major timelines, Saddam Hussein was going to acquire weapons of mass destruction and either use them or use them to blackmail the West. But then by invading Iraq in early 2003, we prevented him from getting weapons of mass destruction. So we had the egg on the face of the United States leadership was the outcome that results from detecting a future event and preventing it by intervening in the present before it happens to prevent it occurring. Now, when I was on Pegasus, the project engineers and scientists and administrators were fairly unanimous in their belief that that should not be done, that quantum engineering should not be done based on quantum access. They wanted to just use quantum access to gather information about the past and future and use it for Defense Department contingency planning. And I think in among that, with that we can include the deep underground military construction in the Southwest, for example, the construction of the Denver International Airport as a continuity of government hub for the U.S. federal bureaucracy in the event that Washington, D.C. is destroyed. But I think it's fraught with profound implications, and so I'm speaking out because I think a lot of people intuit that we're being manipulated somehow, but they don't have my information, so they don't know that the manipulation that has occurred is one in which devices that allow for quantum access are giving the government insiders information about the future before it happens. I also don't believe that, Groucho Marx once said something characteristically brilliant of him. He said, "I don't want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member."
I remember that.
And
I love
I look at
Groucho
it
Marx.
that way with these members of this permanent secret government.